you're not going to get our civil rights stuff passed. Then they're telling him, then they see that he's meeting with Elijah Muhammad, who was on that COINTELPRO watch list. And then the grand culmination is a Washington Post headline from less than 90 days before his assassination that reads something to the effect that his proposed March on Washington in 1968 was being taken over by Leninists and Black Power rights like Stokely Carmichael. And because of his working relationship with Stokely Carmichael, that made him even a greater threat. Because of his popularity in the world and his association with these so-called radicals, that made him an even greater threat. And then it actually says in this article, in 1968, less than 90 days before the assassination, that he had become a threat to national security. Which, if you study political assassination, is just code word for you have to go. Time to go. So then, of course, you hear things like Lyndon Johnson saying, what am I going to do about this nigger preacher? You hear about Newsweek and Time referring to him as a buffoon and an imbecile who has no constituency anymore. You read about how they said his Riverside speech in 1967 in New York City, where he railed against not only capitalism and white supremacy and liberalism, but of course the Vietnam War. They said that might have well been a speech written by Ho Chi Minh. And now, you have to understand, if you don't already, that at the time that these things are being said, that would be literally as if saying somebody today was friendly with R.E.A.L. When you link someone up with Leninism and socialism and communism in the 1960s, you are literally saying to the establishment audience, which is the Washington Post readership, that this person is a threat to national security and a terrorist, and therefore should be dealt with as such, and he was. Which is why at the time the bullet pierced his skin, he was literally under surveillance by the FBI, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, military intelligence, the CIA, and local Memphis police. Now, how all these people were monitoring him up to the point where they had receipts from purchases he had made earlier that same day that he had thrown away in the trash, could somehow not have witnessed who killed him, is literally, to me, unbelievable. And as a jury, when you hear William Pepper's full outline of what actually King was doing and what he was struggling to get rid of, and then you read what those in power were saying about him and those in the establishment media were saying about him, it's impossible to accept the standard story for what happened to Dr. King. So what happens every year, particularly through popular media, is to justify the version of Dr. King that those in power prefer that we have, to justify his, or to justify the fact that we have not seen the change in the world that he wanted to see happen. They give us a version of him that simply doesn't exist. They freeze him in 1963, and I Have a Dream, and forget that he lived another 5 years. And we're supposed to not ask questions, well, what was he doing and saying and writing and thinking and organizing those last 5 years? And it's in those last 5 years that he became the threat that you all are not supposed to be associated with. The fifth tenet of the COINTELPRO operation that I mentioned just a moment ago, the fifth thing they said was specifically this. We have to make sure that black radicalism does not become popular in subsequent generations of black youth. So they were consciously making sure that my generation, and by the time we get to some of your generations, that you are not supposed to know anything about Dr. King or the movements or the ideas to which he was attached and for which he struggled. You're supposed to forget the fact that we are still in the same power struggle that he was struggling against, where you have fewer people in control of more wealth in the world than ever before, fewer people in control of more media in the world than ever before, and where people who are even, like Brzezinski, advisors to President Obama, said specifically that media will make the U.S. an empire that will outlast any previous one in world history. That our control, as he said, over mass communication and popular entertainment and the English language being the language of the internet, that will make us survive as an empire. Our cultural imperial reach will allow us to survive longer than any other empire in world history. So it does become a great concern that whether it is Obama or any other leader or any other academic or journalist or public speaker or songwriter or whoever speaks publicly about Dr. King and denies the history that is due to King, that denies the reality of King himself, that we all must take up the challenge and struggle against that. We owe the man that service. We owe the man that much to at least read what he actually wrote. You should get available, and I can help some of you if you need it. You should read the speeches he gave to the SCLC leadership in the last years of his life when they would have their annual conventions and he would take speeches to them. Many people have not heard these things. Where he said, what the logical conclusion, he said Hitler took the white supremacy to its logical conclusion, which is genocide. He said, because if white people don't want us living in their neighborhoods and eating next to them and intermarrying with them, what they're ultimately saying is they don't want us to exist. Flash forward to 2012, you take the UN definition of genocide and look at the condition of black Americans in terms of their lack of access to good food, to good housing, good education, to the cultural distortion, particularly in terms of popular rap music, which is an absolute affront to what hip-hop is and is still creating to this day. We fully fit in the definition of genocide. Black Americans are fully fitting within the UN definition of genocide. We are genocidally being removed as we speak. So as the late, great, recently deceased legal scholar R.E.A.L said, I'm going to bastardize this quote because I don't have it in front of me and I can't get the whole thing, but what he said was, if the country changed its policies to where we just took a couple hundred black people every week out to a secluded place and shot them, that would just be more brutal and more blunt than the policies that we now have in effect that most of us feel powerless to change. And what R.E.A.L was saying was exactly what King and others were struggling against. That simply because you are not lining us up against the wall and shooting us in the street does not mean that your treatment of us is anything different than a genocidal effort. When you intentionally deny people access to what they need to survive, when you intentionally deny people access to the cultures and the cultural expression that they produce, you are encouraging and engaging in a genocidal practice. And to the extent that we can add education and the lack thereof, or what Jonathan Kozol calls, because of the segregated education that we get, cognitive decapitation for black and brown people. If we add that to the list, and when we add that to what's happening to the image of Dr. King, not only is his image being reassassinated on an annual basis, but all of us collectively are being assassinated on a daily basis because we are not aware of, working toward, or successful in achieving what Dr. King himself fought for. He was not a dreamer. In fact, he said that his dream had become a nightmare. That's his quote. He was fully aware that the change that had been promised, that had been claimed, was mythological. And he said, speaking to his unpopularity, he said, how did he put it? He said, a man of conscience is not a consensus builder, but a consensus molder. He's not a consensus seeker, rather. He's a consensus molder. And his point was, I'm not here to be popular. I'm not here to take only the popular position. I'm here to have a revolution. And if that makes me unpopular with the state, if it makes me unpopular with my colleagues in the civil rights movement, so be it. I'm not here to achieve, to support what you have already reached as a consensus, if that consensus is accept things as they are. He said we must have a divine dissatisfaction with things as they are, and recognize that the so-called crimes that we are punished for, put in jail for, are, as he said, the derivative crimes of the state. It is the state's crimes, the violent crimes of capitalism and white supremacy and inequality that cause everything else to come forth as a result. And only those who do the response crimes, as they're called, are punished, and punished in greater numbers than at every time in world history, or this country's history, or any other point in the world, which is why we have the largest prison population the planet has ever seen. So, I think my time is up. I will stop there and encourage you again to read Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. And I'll end as I hope you do with the words of Fred Hampton. To you I say peace, if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, and thanks for having me here.
Hi, my name is Rachel Magaka, and I used to teach here, but I don't anymore. I came here as a classics major, and I ended up teaching English. And I just want to say that I love this event. I've been doing it every year since then. What I get to do is I get to read Dr. King every year and pick out quotes. And I'm really glad that this year I chose some things from a letter from Birmingham jail, because we've already talked about that a little bit. But I just want to say that I feel like really the most important people in terms of philosophical revolutionaries in the world as Socrates, Jesus, and Martin